Hello, everybody, and welcome to The Owner's Box After Dark. I'm your host, Mark Farinella, the former assistant sports editor and Patriots beat writer and sports columnist of the Sun Chronicle of Attleboro, Massachusetts. And it's Thursday, August 20th, 2020, or at least for about 8 more minutes as I start this, here in the palatial confines of Fulton Pond Studios in Mansfield, Massachusetts. We opened tonight's show in Studio A here of Fulton Pond Studios. It's our traditional home base for both of our podcasts, our video podcast, and the standard bearer of this franchise, the audio version of The Owner's Box, which will be resuming again shortly, I promise you. Tonight, we're going to be delving in depth into the decision of the Massachusetts Interscholastic Athletic Association to proceed with a fall schedule for high school sports in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. For all sports except football. Let's keep that in mind there. It's going to be the little kicker to this whole thing. But first, I make mention of my location tonight because it's part of some exciting changes that I and the rest of the Duck and Cover Productions crew have made to our operation with the goal of presenting a better product to you, our listeners and viewers. And with that in mind, I turn things over to a great friend and a man among men, Mark Farinella, who will be coming to you from Studio B here at Fulton Pond Studios. Mark, take it away. And welcome back to Studio B here in the palatial surroundings of Fulton Pond Studios. You might be familiar with it because I did a previous episode of The Owner's Box After Dark here in the, it's actually where I unveiled my Hugh Hefner pipe. You'll see this occasionally pop up. It's a good place for me to research other things. I have a brand new computer to my left, and it is faster and stronger and all those other good things. And it has more memory, and hopefully I'll be able to do some segments from here. I know that when I do something remotely with somebody, I have better computer speeds here. I have better downloads. This is connected directly to my router, so I should be able to do much better video for people who I connect to. There's a show on North TV called Up for Discussion, hosted by my friend Peter Gay. We have a couple of the other folks at North TV appearing on it, and we discuss topics of the day. We've had to do it remotely during the pandemic, and Peter says that I've had some trouble on the other computer, and I haven't been able to really, I break up a lot. So hopefully this will cure the entire problem, and because it will be seamless with my other production capabilities, I'm pretty sure I'll be able to do some pretty great stuff here. So, in fact, I expect I will be back here in Studio B later in this episode, so please stay tuned. Thanks, Mark. We'll check back in with you shortly. But I first want to take a deeper look at those changes we've been talking about. As you can see from the photo I'm about to show you, we've installed a brand new computer in Studio B, and it's got very impressive capabilities. It's where I'll be able to do faster editing and hopefully be able to join into all sorts of conference calls with broadcast quality audio and video, taking advantage of the superior downloading capacity I have there. In fact, we talked about that briefly, Mark did, mentioning shows like that one on North TV that I got so many complaints from the people over at North TV about my bandwidth, apparently. So back here in Studio A, we've also made a few important changes. I'm really excited about those. First, we've added a huge light ring. You might be able to see in my glasses, see the circular look of that ring there. What I have here is a light ring that shines down upon me, and that provides even and lifelike illumination of my chiseled features, rather than having a lamp shining in my eyes, which I had before, and I've got something else off to the side here. That's going to make things look a little bit better, I think. And I've also been able to install a full workstation here. Now, the idea of this is for my guests whenever I can reopen the studio to guests. I've got a internet-enabled computer and a monitor, keyboard and mouse, and I'm thinking ahead to that day when I'll be able to welcome people back into my house and have them in here to do the podcast. The workstation will enable them to consult the internet during the recording if they need it. And I'm investigating the possibility of adding a camera to it for future video segments. I have the software apparently where I can pull in stuff from multiple cameras, so if that's the case, I think that would work really nice. And the funny thing is, it might not have been possible if not for the fact that the old office computer seized up on me. The hard drive went haywire and forced a considerable expenditure of money. I first, what do you do with an old computer? I mean, you can recycle it, I guess. You can throw it out. But the only thing wrong with it was the hard drive. And I pulled that out. I mean, I know a little bit about how to get into these computers. So what I did was I pulled out the hard drive, and I thought I had an old hard drive from the previous computer, which was identical to the one that's now sitting under this table. I figured, why not just throw that in there and see if it works? So I opened the thing up. I put that hard drive in, added a few other little features here and there that I knew I could do. And the next thing you know, it's running Windows 7 from 2012, just like it was yesterday. In fact, it was kind of weird to see that because I didn't realize, you don't realize how many things change in 8 years. But in the world of computing and in all those other things that go on, just so many things change. And then reading some of my old columns from back then, which I apparently left in that hard drive and didn't think about bringing over to the new one. It was still pretty impressive, and it works. So, now I'm going to add internet access to it shortly, and putting that in has saved me some money. It gives me an opportunity for a guest to come in here and have a nice little computer in front of them if they need it. And I guess it's all the philosophy of waste not, want not. And the good thing is that throughout all this, I didn't blow up my house in the process, so I'm happy about that. But with all that in mind, let's get to the meat and potatoes of tonight's episode, and we'll go back to my brother from an alternate universe, Mark Farinella in Studio B, to talk about the return of high school sports in Massachusetts this fall. Take it away, Fearless. Well, thank you very much, big fella, and welcome back to Studio B. I have in my hands right here, and you can hear the rustling of the papers, all of the information, all of the news that thousands of high school athletes in Massachusetts were hoping to hear before a lot sooner than this, actually. It's been a summer and a spring, and actually the end of last winter, filled with restrictions and sacrifice and disappointment. And to be honest, there's still a measure of concern about the future because there's no real guarantee right now that these plans to get sports back in gear are going to be able to be executed. Because, let's face it, the COVID-19 virus just doesn't listen to anything. It doesn't hear us. It doesn't feel the same longing that our athletes and the coaches have felt, the longing to end their exile from the playing fields and the courts, and to return to the pursuits of a carefree and joyous youth, which they really were denied dating back as far as March. Now, they may have that chance this fall, but there's no guarantee right now. There will still be restrictions, for sure, and those in charge are counting upon the young athletes to conduct themselves with the knowledge and the responsibility that they gained during the long months of the pandemic. That will make it all happen, I hope. Now, here are the details of what we're looking at. Even back as far, I guess you would say, as the last week and the very last day of the winter season last year, when the state championships in basketball and hockey were canceled by the first signs that this coronavirus scare was becoming a honest-to-God threat to everybody's life, people have been trying to figure out how do we get things back. Well, obviously they determined pretty quickly that the spring season would not be a go. We were in lockdown. There was absolutely no way we could get anything going at that point in time. But this whole thing has lasted a lot longer than anybody anticipated it would, and even right now, as I speak, even though the numbers are pretty flat, we've done a pretty good job in Massachusetts and most of the northeastern states, in fact, in kind of combating this virus, but we haven't conquered it yet. And all of this could change if all of a sudden you see spikes popping up everywhere. And there are a few here and there, and the big fear in Massachusetts, and especially in the Boston area, is if college students come back and they start partying, and then all of a sudden they're coming from all parts of the nation, and next thing you know, you've got coronavirus cases coming out of the woodwork. But in the meantime, people had to try to plan for the reopening, and there's been a lot of pressure put on people to reopen in this pandemic, and I'll give Governor Charlie Baker a lot of credit. He resisted the call of his political party, especially from the top, to take a much more cautious and measured approach to everything, which is probably not going to get him a speaking date at the Republican convention next week. I can guarantee you he's not going to have that. But this whole process has been the undertaking of many, many panels. You have the Massachusetts Interscholastic Athletic Association and its individual sports committees. You also had the Tournament Management Committee involved in this. I think another key was the Board of Directors, which usually has the final say in anything that goes on with the MIAA. But aside from Governor Baker's office, you also had input from the Executive Office of Energy and Environmental Affairs, which has been EEA, if you follow us on, continue to follow this, and the Department of the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education, and they have done their best to create guidelines that would make it possible for sports to come back, but under guarded conditions. And I think that's what we're seeing, is that anything that happens in the next few weeks to come is going to still be very guarded. And of course, when these guidelines came down, even with the improvement in the coronavirus situation here in Massachusetts, there's still a lot of concern, and that concern basically deep-sixed football for the fall. You just can't play football and social distance at the same time. It's just not possible. So, working with these guidelines, the MIAA Tournament Management Committee worked hard to come up with potential schedules, and the COVID-19 task force, which was set up during the midst of the pandemic, they did create a proposal for 4 seasons. Let's get that fourth finger up there. See, 4. 4 seasons. You will have a fall season. You will have a winter season. And you'll have a spring season. But in between the winter and the spring season, you're going to get this little wedge season in there. And that's going to be where football will be played, and maybe something else depending upon the situation, depending upon how things go. So what they did, first of all, was they set up basically 3 levels of what the sports were in regard to their potential risk for coronavirus infection. There were the low-risk sports, and those are the ones with the least amount of contact. There were the medium-risk sports, where there's some contact between players, but mostly everybody's moving in action and they're spaced apart. And then there was the high-risk sports, where there is an awful lot of contact and everybody's clustered in a small area. And there were sports that I was a little surprised were placed into that high-risk category, but everything, in fact, will be reviewed again at the end of a season. So right now, the board of directors gave its blessing to what happened with the COVID-19 task force of the MIAA, as developed by the Tournament Management Committee and others. Also, with the EEA's guidelines, the EEA was less concerned about when these things would be played as to how they would be played. And it is suggesting some pretty radical restrictions on some of the sports. And I think that not all of them can be really adhered to in high school sports. Now, maybe in youth sports, that's another thing. Maybe they can find a way to do some of the extra spacing, to lessen contact and all that. But I think in high school sports, you're just going to have to suffer a little bit. Hopefully that these kids will all be paying attention to wearing masks and washing their hands and all that, and staying safe as best they can. But it all worked toward a point. And when the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education finally got involved at the end of this, they seemed pretty favorable as to the work that the MIAA had done. And thus the blessing has been given for a fall season. But right now, as I said, it's still up in the air as to whether it will happen. But let's see what, if I could move ahead a little bit here in my sheets. I just love having information. Here's what they came up with for a modified sports season in the fall. Now, in the fall, because of the way that schools are opening, too, this is something that's very important here. A lot of schools are opening remotely. A lot of school systems will not have students in their buildings immediately. And they're all starting later than they normally would either. Others will be going with a hybrid system. They will have a few days in and other days working at home on their computers. And nobody has really opted, I don't think, in the Commonwealth yet for the full reopening, immediate reopening, except maybe, I think Bishop Fian might have been, I think the the Diocese of Fall River might have decided that their schools are going to try to crank it up right off the bat. But I may not be totally correct on that, so I will just sort of leave that one way or the other. All of these schools can begin sports regardless of how they are opening. Look at it this way: it's kind of the same if you have a homeschooled student. They can participate in high school sports even though they're never in the building, as long as they register with the community in which they live and all that. I can think of some very good softball players at Norton High School a few years back that were homeschooled. I know there were a few others here and there that I've seen. So it's kind of on that same premise that as long as you're participating in a certain way under how schooling is taking place in that community, they have no objection to you being out there on the practice field under these restrictions. So anyway, the first date for practice in the fall will be September 18th. And that doesn't mean it immediately starts up with games. It'll probably be as much as anywhere from a week or two. And the sports that will be going will be golf, cross country, field hockey, boys and girls soccer, gymnastics, girls volleyball, fall swimming and diving, and there will be allowances for football practice and for the practice for competition cheering, which are both listed as high-risk sports. And that season will probably go, I think, until the 20th of November, but we'll get back into that in a couple of seconds. Now, that's all that's been approved by the MIA Board of Directors and by the Department of Education. And I still think Charlie Baker has to weigh in on this too. And it could all collapse too if all of a sudden, and I think some of you may have seen news reports where there's the risk and the number of COVID cases. You might see a map of Massachusetts. You'll see towns in certain colors. They've established a kind of a hierarchy. If your town is one color, and I can't remember them off the top of my head, and I apologize for that, but if your town is one color, you have low risk right at that time. If it's another color, it's medium, and then if it's, I can't remember if it's green or red, I think it might be red, then it's head for the hills. So some of that could interrupt all of these plans and force communities and schools in those high-risk categories to not compete in anything until that wedge season, and we'll get into that in a second. But anyway, that is the fall lineup, and obviously the seasons will be shortened. There will be no MIAA tournaments this year, but the word is out that the individual leagues can create little tournament structures if they have the time and the willingness to schedule that way, and at least that would give some of these kids a feel of a tournament type of atmosphere, which I'm glad that they'll have some opportunity to feel that. Now, the winter season still is TBA according to what was approved the other day. The sports in that season are winter gymnastics, boys and girls indoor track, skiing, dance, winter swimming and diving, cheerleading, hockey, basketball, and wrestling. Now, a couple of interesting things there. I won't get into it right off the bat. The floating season will start at the close of that. And basically what they're saying, it's basically for football. It's basically been created for football and competition sharing, but, football. And also, it says here that sports unable to play in earlier seasons may engage in level 3 play competitions if permitted by updated EEA guidelines. And in fact, they will be updating, as I said. They'll be taking great looks at all this as it goes along. And then finally, the spring season will start after that, and it will include girls golf, baseball, softball, tennis, boys volleyball, girls and boys lacrosse, track and field, and rugby. Okay? So, that's what they've approved. Now, the recommendation from the COVID-19 committee has been followed pretty much for all this at this time. So, courtesy of the MIAA's website, here are the dates for the other seasons. As I said before, September 18th through November 20th would be the fall sports season. The winter sports season would begin on November 30th. Now that's the start of practice, which means you probably couldn't have games until probably at least the end of the first week of December. And that will extend until February 21st. I have a quibble with that, and I'll get back to it in a second. The fall sports 2 season, or the floating season, the wedge season, the football season, will run from February 22nd to April 25th. And again, there will be no tournament, no Super Bowls, no nothing like that. And remember, the year after all this, we go into the new statewide tournament situation where everything goes to max preps, and then teams are playing from all over the state, and that's a whole nother thing, and I won't even bother to get into it right now because I've beat that one into the dirt leading up to this, and we have plenty more time to worry about that. And then the spring sports season would go from April 26th to July 3rd. Now, I know that there are a lot of seniors who are out of class by early May, and usually at least by no later than the last week of May or the early part of the first week of June. So you're expecting everybody to stay for a whole month looking for summer jobs and trying to get their summer gear, trying to figure out what they're doing with their colleges and all that. And I don't know how, and then again, I'm not sure how the teachers' unions are going to react to expecting people to be on board for a later month like that. But all to be crossed, that bridge will be crossed when we drive over it. So, all right, the quibble I have with the winter season, especially, as many of you folks know, I'm a big fan of girls basketball and have been for a long time, although I really love covering everything right now, and I've had a great time covering boys and girls basketball and doing the play-by-play for these sports in Mansfield and King Philip and Foxborough. But since this whole wedge season was created basically for football, the original date that was put forth by the COVID-19 committee of the MIAA was to go until February 28th for the winter season, which is one more week. And personally, I'm not really sure why they had to go back a week, because you're reducing the length of the season immensely at that point. I'm hearing that there will be only two games per week scheduled, and so as a result, you're looking at February. All right, so December 7th maybe. Let's start. So 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, maybe 14 games total for your regular season, and maybe a few games if you have a league tournament after that. Whereas right now, a team that goes as far as a state championship game can play as many as 27 games. And I love the more games, the happier. I mean, last year I saw 2 teams go to the state semifinal, which was the next to last game. Now, unfortunately, the Mansfield boys lost in their state semifinal to Lynn English. The Foxborough girls beat North Reading and would have gone on to play some school. I'll remember it in a second. They were going to play Taconic High School from Pittsfield in the state championship game that was canceled. And as a result, the Foxborough girls were awarded a part of a state championship. I just don't know, especially in the case of girls basketball, I don't know why they have to have a week taken away from them for football. It doesn't impact them. Football, there are probably, maybe 2 or 3 girls in an entire league that play football these days. There might be a couple others here and there, but they hardly ever get into games. I'm not saying that there's good or bad or anything. I'm not trying to make a judgment on any of this. If they want to play football and it's available to them, God bless them. All for it. But the fact is, for these girls that are playing basketball, their season's being cut short for a reason that it really shouldn't be. They should be allowed to be playing another week, at least, until that next season starts. And they won't be. So their season will be cut down significantly. There's a couple of situations. I guess I'm being a little greedy here and maybe a little selfish, but I mean, I see the cases of, all right, look at the Mansfield High School boys this coming year. I'm glad that they were able to put the season after basketball. I mean, I'm happy about that. But you look at the Mansfield boys, and at least 3 of their best players, probably 4, maybe more. Matty Bowen, he's going to be the quarterback of the football team this year. TJ Guy, recruited to Michigan as a defensive end. Sincere Gill, great running back and a very promising guard who showed an awful lot in the tournament last year. Jack Colby, he's a classic 3-sport athlete kid. These kids all be having to pack up very quickly after basketball and go into football. At least they weren't made to make a choice between the two. Although I don't know, if I'm Mike Vaughn, the Mansfield High boys coach, I'm really happy that I got my kids before they played football instead of afterwards. But some may be tempted to say, well, you know what, football, I got to be ready for football. Maybe I won't play basketball this year, and that would be terrible, especially since Bowen and Guy are very close to, they could make it, well, maybe they're not that close. They could get close to 1,000 career points. I felt it was no problem if they had a full 20 to 22 game regular season and then could play in the tournament after that. Now, if their season's going to be cut down to anywhere between 14 and 18 games maybe, it might be a challenge to them. And, of course, there will be no state championship in the offing. I think this team had a chance to get one. But I would like to, in fact, one of the things I will probably try to do in the weeks to come is I'll probably try to get Mike Vaughn, the boys basketball coach, and Mike Redding, the football coach and the incoming athletic director this year at Mansfield High, to get their thoughts as to how this schedule all broke down. And then again, let's remember, it's still not etched in stone. The other person I'd like to talk to, and she is a familiar and frequent guest on my podcast, is Lisa Downs, the Foxborough girls coach, basketball, of course. I'd like to get her feelings on how she feels about her season being cut short for a sport that basically none of her kids have to prepare for. So plenty of unanswered questions to go. But the beneficial part of all this is that there is a framework for a season this year. It's going to be interrupted. It's going to be different. But at least they have a chance to play something. And as long as they can all stay healthy, and, you know, let's face it, that's the most important thing. You know, I'm very glad that chance will be theirs. I would not have wanted to see another lost season like this spring and the heartbreak that accompanied it. But of course, there is greater heartbreak, and that's potentially the infection and illness to family members that kids might unwittingly bring home. So if they're going to do it, let's do it right. And this might be the best option of all, and maybe hopefully by 2021 we can all get back to normal. And with that, I will return this program to Studio A, and my good buddy from that planet on the other side of the sun, Mark Farinella. Okay, Mark, thank you again. With that, I think we'll wrap up tonight's edition of The Owner's Box After Dark. And I think he kept my pipe. Oh my goodness, I gotta talk to him about that. You know, it's not easy to open the dimensional rift that way, but I will find a way to get that pipe back. Anyway, for those of you who would like to see links to all of my podcasts, the audio ones as well as the video ones, you can check out my website. It's www.theownersbox2020.com. Type in the www. I think it helps. There's some issue with it, but it'll be fine. And of course, if you would like to send me an email to let me know what you think about these podcasts, video and audio alike, the email address for that is theownersbox2020 at gmail.com. Send me something. I really want to get mail. And speaking of mail, I'm also a traditionalist of sorts, so you can send me traditional snail mail. The address is The Owner's Box, Post Office Box 272, Mansfield, Massachusetts, 02048. We'll be back with another one soon, I'm sure. In the meantime, please stay safe, stay comfortable at home. Be careful when you go out. Wear your masks. Wash your hands. Use hand sanitizer. I'm finding more of this stuff. I'm telling you, now I'm hoarding it. Somebody should send me an email and tell me to stop hoarding it. I know. But at least if the next pandemic strikes, I'll be all set. And whatever you do, treat your neighbors with a little bit of respect. I hope you watch the convention, the Democratic convention this week. Yes, I will probably be voting Democratic. I'm not a registered anything, but I do lean that way. And I was very impressed with the former Vice President Joe Biden's speech. And I honestly believe the man has great empathy for this nation, which our current president does not. So I honestly think that you should consider voting for him as well. Okay, that's as political as I'm going to get. Again, thanks very much. Be good, be safe, and we'll see you again soon. Good night, everybody.